everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Indifferent Strokes, where we talk about everything from stroke prevention to stroke recovery. And this is an exciting episode that I've really been looking forward to for quite some time. Last episode, we spoke about some emerging innovations when it comes to stroke prevention, and that was for people to help obviously prevent them from having strokes. And as a stroke survivor myself, I've really been interested in what types of emerging technologies are coming out and that may potentially be available for stroke survivors. So if you're a stroke survivor or you know a stroke survivor, pay a lot of attention to this episode because we have some really exciting emerging things happening in the field of stroke recovery. And as always, my guest is the renowned Dr. Charles Esenwa, who's here to help us break down some of these technologies, because in some of the stroke forums that I've been in, I've seen a lot of these things being spoken about, and I felt like it was important for an actual doctor to come in and give his take on them. So, Dr. Charles, thanks for joining me for this one. And yeah, let's inform some people.
Thanks, Adrian.
How are you doing today, first of all?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on this show, and because I know that at the end of the day, it's going to help somebody. And what we want to do is provide information where people can use it to better their health. So today, as you said, we're going to be talking about hope on the horizon. What are some potential ways that people with a history of stroke or some sort of debilitating neurological problem can get better? And most often when we talk about stroke-related deficits, we're usually talking about movement problems. And so I think today we're really going to focus more on what the doctors call hemiparesis or paresis or plegia, which is a inability to move one side of the body.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm, as a stroke survivor, I'm a member of several stroke groups on Facebook, as well as the host of one. I have one for Stroke Recovery Now, and one of the topics that I see has gotten a lot of excitement and that I haven't heard any doctors necessarily talking about as of yet is an emerging drug called DDL920. And some doctors at UCLA have been using this to help restore movement in mice that have had strokes. And so right now it's in the testing phase, but a lot of stroke survivors have really been excited to hear about this. And so I wanted to get your take on it. I know you've read over the paperwork and the studies, and I just wanted to see what you thought about this.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Adrian. It is exciting to have a potential therapy for improving recovery after stroke. DDL9 is a compound, as you said, a drug, potential drug in the future, that is still early on in the testing phase. So this is what we call preclinical studies. Before these medications can make it to being used in humans, they have to be proven in mice. And so this study was, you said, done in mice. Nevertheless, the results were exciting in that for the group of mice that were given this experimental medication, their ability, so their what we call neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to recover rapidly, was much improved compared to mice that didn't get the medication. And so it is a potential lead. I think what was really fascinating about this study was that they really proved that a subset of the neurons or nerves in the brain, the neuron cells in the brain, were able to respond or were able to get activated by this medication, and those neurons specifically were the ones that control neuroplasticity. And so I don't think there's been a target like this before where medication specifically targets these neurons, and it seems like these are the neurons that are the ones that cause neuroplasticity to happen. And so it may be some time away where we can see this type of medication. If it's not this one, maybe others that are similar. It may be some time before we can see that in being used in humans, but this is definitely something to look out for in maybe three years, it may be 5 years, we don't know. But there's definitely hope on the horizon with this medication.
That sounds amazing because, yeah, like you said, I know a lot of stroke survivors that are, really feeling down and feeling as if this is going to be their, like what a lot of doctors tell them is like their foreseeable future, and this is what their future looks like forever. And so I think even if it's early on, I do think it's exciting because, everything like that is created, always starts at a point that opens the groundwork, and then you have people that build upon the shoulders of those types of things. And so the fact that they are studying this kind of thing, I feel it is really exciting. And although, that nothing is promised, it is exciting to hear that these types of things are in the works and do have some potential. So let's see how it goes. And besides that, we're going to touch on a few other things. One of the other things is, again, we're in the future now, right? So there's things like neuro-rehabilitation, which is a mouthful, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, these are exciting times. Not only do we have potential therapeutics or chemicals that can stimulate neuroplasticity like DDL 920, but there are robotics. We're in the future of robotics and AI that can really enhance people's recovery. And so when we talk about robotics or robotic assisted neurorehabilitation, we can really break that down into a number of different types of robotic assisted neurorehab. One is just robotics that help people move a certain way. So these are kind of like early prosthetics. So instead of actually having a prosthetic, it's kind of a robotic machine that people will put their arm in, and the machine will move somebody's arm. And so that's been around for some time. We know that those types of therapies work to improve sort of and stimulate that repetitive motion. And by having that repetitive motion, the brain relearns that motion again. So that's one aspect. Another aspect of robotic assisted neurorehabilitation is actually prosthetics, right? There are now people that, for example, they can't move one side of their body or have potentially amputations. Putting an actual prosthetic that helps them live their life in a way that allows them to do the things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do, that's also in development. And what's relatively new compared to old school prosthetics where it's maybe just a plastic joint or a plastic or metal leg or arm, is that now they can they're beginning to be able to talk to the nerves, and so people can actually sense.
Yeah, the brain is sending signals to
Exactly.
that device and getting that. That's super
And
exciting. It
getting
makes me think about the $6 million man.
and getting signals, exactly. So it becomes where the prosthetics are basically much more part of your body rather than just a piece of plastic. They're actually your limb that you can sense and you can move, just like you said.
Yeah, man, that's super exciting.
And that is exciting, and we're still some time away from having this as a mainstream thing, but for certain people, that are paralyzed, for example, that there's definitely hope that in the future these types of devices may allow them to walk again,
Hmm.
or to cook again, or to
Yeah,
drive again. And so this is definitely an exciting time to be in stroke neurology and neurorehabilitation.
and then so does that kind of like tie in with things like the brain computer interface?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a loaded term, the brain-computer interface. So before we get to the brain-computer interface, because I think that's probably the real future, that's kind of like
Mm.
10, 20 years down the line, but potentially a lot of the neurorehabilitation issues or difficulties that we're having now will potentially be solved with various forms of brain-computer interface. So before we even get to that point, I just want to make it pretty clear for our listeners to understand like what is actually happening in the brain after a stroke, because I think that's really an important piece of information that people have to understand in order to understand what a brain-computer interface is. And so let's just go back to the Adrian Bailey story, right?
Mm.
I think for the most part at this point your listeners know that you had a devastating stroke about a year ago. You could tell us the details, but my understanding is that you couldn't move the entire left side
Yeah,
of
I
your body.
couldn't move my entire left side, couldn't move, couldn't feel. I remember being in the hospital and it was a little chilly and I wanted to pull the covers up and I literally couldn't even move my hand, and it's a surreal experience to be looking at your hand saying this and it not listening. So yeah, yeah,
And thanks for sharing
super
that, because it's
scary.
so important for our audience to, whether they've had a stroke or not, to understand what a stroke is and be able to spot it. And so typically the symptoms of a stroke are often related to weakness on one side of the body.
Mm.
And that's because the brain is really partitioned into two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere talks to the left side of the body. The left hemisphere talks to the right side of the body. We don't know why exactly that is, but that's the reality. That's the science behind it. And so in your case, you had a stroke on the right side of your brain, and
Yep.
your entire left side was not moving as a result. And so what was it that caused the brain on the right side of your brain to stop working? And that's related to blood flow. So whenever blood flow stops, whenever there's a occlusion or a blockage of the artery that feeds the right side of the brain stops working. There's no blood going to it, just starts to shut down. And as soon as the brain starts to shut down, immediately the body starts to shut down. So just remember, a stroke is sudden. It's very, very quick. As soon as the blood shuts down, it's kind of like cutting.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere. It was, yeah, boom.
It's kind of like cutting off, like turning off the light. It's cutting off the power, and as soon as you cut off the power to the brain stops controlling that part, the other, what we call the contralateral or the opposite side of the body, and things shut down. And in your case, you ended up getting a life-saving medication that opened up the blood vessel again, and you were able to move your left side pretty soon after, correct?
Yeah, it took me, I would say, about 3 days before I was able to start doing any sort of movement. I know initially the doctors had, and my diagnosis has said that it was going to be permanent, which thank God it wasn't. But yeah, it was scary because I had only ever seen things like that in like football movies where a guy hits his head or hurts his spine and they're poking his feet and he can't feel anything. And I remember being scared even watching that as, a viewer of something like that ever happening. And so to actually have gone through it and to be experiencing it was like the most, I don't know, scared I've ever been in my life for sure.
And it must be an absolute surreal experience. I've spoken to thousands of people that have had a stroke, and it's such a personal experience that's so hard to describe is what I'm getting from people. And it's almost, to some people, they say that it's almost surreal. It's hard to really it's so surreal that it's hard to really put into words, other than to say, I couldn't move one side of my body. Have to be the ones to respond. And so in your case, blood flow was restored, the brain started working again, and your deficit, thank God, was quickly started to dissolve and you started to improve. But sometimes, even when people do get medications, and even if they get the best treatment, the brain doesn't boot back up again, and the stroke is permanent. So about 70% of the time that somebody's had a stroke, there's still a residual problem. That there's part of the brain, often the part of the brain that controls movement, is still not functioning, and people are still left with some weakness. And so that leads us to, how do we overcome that area in the brain that's not working? Is there something like a patch that we can put on the brain that mimics the electrical activity of that part of the brain and allows that signal that was happening before the stroke to be restored? And that brings us to brain-computer interface. So tell us, Adrian, what was your sort of, since the stroke, what was your experience with rehabilitation? Did you have to do like movement therapy to get better?
Yeah, I definitely did a lot of movement therapy. I did a lot, I had mentioned to some of the people that might know about, I used to be a motivational coach. And so one of the things that I did, and I still do to this day, because it hasn't been a full year, and I'm still not 100%. Although I can do a lot of the things that I did in the past on my left side, like I still have some things that I'm working through, and so I like I feel like one of the most important parts of me recovering was honestly refusing to accept the diagnosis that the doctors had told myself and my fiance that that was going to be my new normal. And I got to the point where I was just like, I'm not going to accept this. And I have a whole motivational audio that I used to train clients to, that I began listening to. I began tossing it on as soon as I got out. And I've seen that happen where people misdiagnose it, and I couldn't do much. I was just pulling on workout bands. I don't want to go to the hospital, but no, I couldn't do much. You start experiencing. I started doing that, and I also do a lot of things in regards to working other areas of my brain. Do not, while the motor cortex was damaged, I still have other parts of my brain, and I was doing a lot of research as well on how potentially working other areas of your brain, not just the motor cortex, can be beneficial. So I do puzzles, I try and solve equations, I put myself in situations where I have to be using as many different areas of my brain as possible. And I feel like that's been very helpful. And then, that's why I still feel like hearing some of these other potential possibilities can be great. And yeah, we're in the future, right? There's a lot of breakthroughs happening. But look, there's still glitches happening. My camera, I don't know if you've noticed, has been going nuts. And this is an AI camera that's supposed to be figuring things out. So we still have a ways to go. But I think I really wanted to get this episode together because I felt like it was important to hear about some of these things that are happening in the future, because this isn't going to happen forever, right?
It's a great point, and your experience is just tremendous for others to hear, that are in the same boat. Because number one, after a stroke, people feel very down. They feel very depressed. It's a new normal, and sometimes it's very challenging to accept that. Often it's a negative story, right? But what you're saying, that no, it's a new life, and it's a positive story, and the challenge can be overcome. And so what we see is when people have that motivation, they have that sort of ambition, that strength to keep going forward, that actually, it's kind of like turning the volume up. That allows the brain to do its thing to recover. And that allows people to be much more engaged in their recovery, right? If they're thinking positive. It's sometimes, however, what we see is that people feel down and depressed. And so what happens is they're not motivated to do the therapy, and therefore they don't get better.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that there is hope from just where you are mentally. That hope has to be part of the recovery process, because that actually allows the brain, what we call the plasticity, to be turned up, and that allows the rehabilitation that people are going through to actually be effective. If the volume is turned down, no matter how much rehabilitation people are doing, it may not get through. But if the volume is up, every little piece of rehabilitation potentially can get turned into an actual result. And so what I'm hearing from you is the hope also starts internally. It's not just the external forces that we have, the medications, but hope has to be built into our psyche as well.
Yeah, 100%. And so how might that tie in with the bio things that you were mentioning that we could put on the brain? So explain to our viewers and our listeners just a little bit more about what that could potentially look like in the future.
Yeah, so thanks for keeping us on track, and let's get back to what we were saying about that part of the brain not functioning. And so what you want to do is you want to have that part of the brain start to be active again. And so the ways that we're doing it now is we just exercise it continuously. You just exercise the arm continuously, hoping that that part of the brain sort of turns on. There are some assistive things with the machines that we talked about. There's medications. And what we're seeing now is that there are some forms of adaptive therapy that are beneficial in the rehab process, like virtual reality. And so let's imagine that we are in a virtual reality space and somebody that can't move the left side of their body, and that space is seeing their arm go up and down. And so the brain is basically routing those visual signals to the area that has been damaged, and that area is starting to recover slowly. And so these forms of virtual reality have a potential to emphasize or to improve recovery more than just the usual. Take that one step further, and you have this brain-computer interface where basically it's a surgical procedure. And again, this is extremely experimental. There aren't many companies that are doing this just yet. This is
So Elon Musk, Neuralink, are
yeah,
he doing
Neuralink
something
is
with that?
right. So Neuralink is one example of what they're trying to do. Basically, it's a surgery that currently we do these types of surgeries for other issues and not necessarily for stroke rehab, but potentially a brain-computer interface, a electrical sort of grid will be placed on the brain where the stroke happened, and that will allow the brain to communicate electrically to some sort of external device. And that external device can control a hand, that external device can control a leg, that external device can control a car. You could basically, once you take the signal from the brain and put it outside to some sort of a computer, so brain-computer interface. Once you do that, the possibilities are endless. And this is where it's really, really down the line, it's super futuristic, but the potential for improving every single stroke symptom for every person is there. It's just, is it going to be feasible from a financial standpoint? How available is this going to be to people and how quickly? That's the complete unknown. Is the technology going to allow us to do this in the near future, or is the technology still far behind? With the advent of AI, because we need to basically decipher the brain signal first before we put it into a hand. And then on top of that, the brain has to learn how to operate this new hand. That requires artificial intelligence. And so now with the advent of artificial intelligence, the hardware is already there. What we were missing before is the adaptation with AI. Because we're improving on our understanding and ability to execute AI, that this is now becoming a reality. And Neuralink...
Yeah, and it's growing fast. Yeah.
And so that's where we are. I think it requires a lot of insight, a lot of input, a lot of money, a lot of science behind it. But the hope is there that people that were paralyzed before can now start to regain function for their body. They could potentially read again if they can't see related to a stroke. They could potentially walk again if they can't walk. They could potentially draw again if they can't use their right hand. There's definitely potential there, but we're still far out.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I feel like one of the big things I want to get across to people, like we spoke about earlier, is not to give up hope, right? Like the more you can take care of yourself now and not give up hope, the better position you're going to be should these things come around in the future. And you'll be even more prepared to be able to take advantage of them. Whereas if you give up hope now, the chances of your health and your movement, declining, I feel like goes up. The more you stay still, the more you give up, the more you just stop pushing yourself. the harder it's going to be, even should these breakthroughs come through and turn into something more tangible. So I think it's important for everyone to know that. One of the things I'm waiting for is I remember the Matrix when you could plug in and learn karate.
Yeah, that's going to
I'm
be some
learning.
time.
Wait, yeah, yeah,
That's the
yeah,
ultimate
yeah.
brain-computer interface. Yeah, and there's definitely some ethical concerns.
Sure.
Don't get it wrong. There's some major ethical implications on this. Is this even appropriate to do this? What about
Yes, they're gonna know everything I'm thinking. I don't know if I
yeah,
want that either. Yeah, yeah.
and who has access to it? Do you have to be a millionaire to or a billionaire essentially to have this place now? Which is what's kind of going on in the immediate future. Is the only people that have access to it are going to be the ultra wealthy, right? And so there's a number of ethical implications here. So we're just I think we're just touching on what could be
Hmm.
the positives, but I think we also have to remember that there are some challenges also that have to be overcome aside just from technology. There's social challenges, there's ethical challenges, and that's something to keep in mind as well. But I do like what you said, which is you have to be ready. What we know is that the body is miraculous. The body's ability to recover is miraculous, and what I mean by that is if people are mentally focused, mentally in a good place, whether that's through medications or through therapy, they are physically active, they are controlling all their risk factors like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they're not smoking. The body can recover just through doing things that we normally know as being healthy. The things that your parents, your grandparents, generations of people have known. Stay active, eat well, socialize with others. Those things do often more than they're able to benefit the brain much more than drugs alone. And so really
Yeah.
changing your lifestyle and keeping a healthy lifestyle not only prevents further strokes, keeping track of blood pressure,
Hmm.
making sure his blood pressure is good, not only prevents future strokes, but also has the ability to maintain optimal brain health for rehabilitation purposes.
100%. And so several of the clients that I've been working with have, like, I've had a client who ran for the first time a couple of weeks ago, another client who rode a bike for the first time. I've had two that, like you said, couldn't read, that read for the first time. One of them, one of her friends wrote a 90-page book, and she literally cried that she was able to read because she was always an avid reader. And for whatever reason, after the stroke, she couldn't read, and she read for the first time. And so I've had even more stories than that. And these were people that at one point were thinking again, oh, well, the doctor told me this is the new normal. And because they have gotten more motivated and started taking action again and left the disbelief in the past, they have made some huge improvements that have been very helpful in their lives. Several have even gone back to work, which is a big deal because, a lot of times after a stroke, you can't work. And so, one guy just passed a test. I think he does like financial planning. It was a really hard test and he just finished passing it. So I was super excited for him. I'm super happy for you, man. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Charles. I'm sure this isn't going to be the last episode we do on these types of breakthroughs as emerging things come out. This is the place to come where Dr. Charles and I will talk about it, keep you posted, and keep you informed on exactly what to do. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for taking your time off to help record this. Enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day. And to all the viewers and listeners, we will speak to you again soon.
Yeah, no, thank you, Adrian. Thanks for having me. It's always a great time speaking with you, and I think we're getting better at this. Honestly,
I
our neural
agree. I
networks are
agree.
starting to move around, and
Yeah,
that's
like
the beauty
anything,
of
right?
the brain is that it's so adaptable. The brain is more complex than anything else we know in the universe, and it just adapts. Like the brain is just really good at taking information, processing it, and then turning it out. So the last thing I want to say is there's no 100% in medicine. So anytime somebody tells you you will never walk again, you will never move again, don't take that as 100% fact because in medicine we never know what's going to happen and we use our experience to guide us, but often we are thrilled when we see our patients do better than we expected. And you've done
Yeah.
that exactly. And so that's one thing. On the other hand, when a doctor tells you you should 100% take your medications, that's something that you should listen to, because we may not be great at giving you a 100% prognosis, but generally we know that staying compliant with medications and taking them as prescribed routinely is extremely important to preventing future events and keeping people healthy. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people have recurrent strokes or repeated strokes because they, for some reason, stopped taking their medications or missed medications or whatever it is. So while you want to prove your doctor wrong and your recovery, you want to make sure
Not there, not in that area,
not in
for
that
sure.
area,
Yeah.
not in
As
some
someone
medications.
who I used to hate taking medicine, I was always anti-medicine. Now, like I am on it. I have alarms on my phone. I don't play around. This was too big of a deal for me to risk having to fight back from another one.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. That's right.
yeah.
Especially with people with atrial fibrillation, which is a heart problem that causes people to develop blood clots in their heart. Those blood
Mm.
clots go to the brain, block off blood vessels. In that scenario, there's really no exercise or diet or anything else that we can do on our own. Really, the only choice there for preventing a stroke is to take a blood thinner regularly in order to prevent those blood clots from forming in the heart. So to our audience, thank you for listening. Please, if you have anything that you want us to talk about, just put it in the comments and we will get to it as soon as possible. And we just thank you for giving us your time.